Welcome to the They to We Leadership Podcast, where we unpack the hard truths about management. Many professionals excel at the work itself, but when they step into management, everything changes. Each episode, we explore why so many struggle with that shift and how reconnecting with your people, your purpose, and your identity as a manager can make all the difference. One of the things that I have found out over the years is that what makes us follow through and do leadership rather than just talk about it is having accountability. And if you remember in the illustration of the Honolulu questions, which is what are your weaknesses? What are you doing about these weaknesses? And who are three or more people in your life who hold you accountable for these weaknesses? The reason those first two questions are tough is because we don't have people in our lives telling us the reality of how we're doing. And I was first introduced to that on this whole thing of positive accountability is when I was in a military unit. And at the beginning of every week, the commanding officer, we would have a staff meeting. And I know all of you have been in staff meetings, but this was always a little bit different. We would all sit there and he would say, all right, everybody go around the room and tell me and the others what you got going this week. And one, that made you have a plan. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It made you come in prepared to here's what I've got to do. Here is my to-do list for the week. And everybody would go around the room. You set your own agenda as an individual, but then guess what's going to happen that week? You know that the end of the week is coming. And you know that you made a statement in front of everybody about certain plans to do things. And at the end of the week, they're going to be looking at you and seeing if you actually followed through. And that's vice versa. We're all, in a way, holding each other in a benevolent way accountable by listening at the end of the work week. Did we do this? And what was interesting was that caused, it was probably one of the most effective work units I was ever in because we knew we had to face each other at the end of the week, not the commanding officer, but each other. And it was very effective in forcing me and everyone else to apply what we know we need to do rather than what we feel like doing. And that was my first introduction to this whole concept of positive peer pressure that are all based on having men and women around you encourage you to follow through and do leadership, not just talk about it. Another example that I saw of this accountability, and again, it's a benevolent accountability. You're not going to be yelled at. This is that you are facing your peers and they're expecting you to follow through and you're expecting them to follow through of promises, quote, that you made. And one of those was an agency, it was a city agency. And when I was talking to the chief there, I asked him how things were going. He said, it's going good. And which is not normally what sometimes managers say. And I asked how the agency was doing, dealing with problems and, all this applying leadership. He said, we do a good job here. And so I was a little suspicious because that's not normal. And so he told me about a meeting that the sergeants have. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, if leadership is not happening at the first line supervisor level, it's not going to happen because those are the people with the contact with the people doing the job. So anyway, the sergeants would meet, I think it was every 2 weeks, end of the week, Friday, and everybody was required to come prepared to discuss what went well in the 2 weeks and what didn't go so well. And so each person would do a debrief of what happened in the last 2 weeks. And you've got to remember, as we look at this, this is an agency of a couple of hundred people where all the sergeants know not only each other, but the people that are being discussed, the best employee, the worst employee, et cetera. And so the good news that they had to share is things that the good employees did and accomplished in the mission, and they would again brief everybody on the good things. And then you had to go through the bad things. What happened? What did the problem employee do? Something that was a hiccup operationally. But after they each person gave their brief, the other people, the other sergeants, would offer their, hey, yeah, I worked with that guy. He was a big problem. What is this other sergeant doing? He's affirming, or she's affirming, what the original sergeant is seeing. And he or she is teaching them, you're not stupid. We saw the same thing. And that also works with a good employee. Oh yeah, he or she is awesome. You ought to put them in for employee of the quarter. And what ended up happening was the synergy of the group, and I love the quote that none of us is as smart as all of us are, that in that positive encouragement as well as wisdom, because the more experienced sergeants would offer suggestions because they were more skilled at certain things to the younger, more inexperienced sergeants. And people would give advice, they'd offer help. Like if it was a problem employee, I'll go with you. Confirmation, yes, he is an excellent officer, or he or she is an idiot. And finally, knowing again benevolently that you're going to face these people in 2 weeks. What is the natural thing that I'm going to do? I'm going to follow through on what we discussed in the meeting. And I know in 2 weeks I'm going to face them. And guess what happens? Because of positive peer pressure, I apply and do what needs to be done. It was interesting in this agency, the chief asked him, well, how is this working out? He'll say, well, I'll be honest with you. He said, I have very few problems to deal with because the sergeants deal with issues at their level and they never float up to the point where they're not being addressed and they get to be worse. So he said, I have the best job in the world. I never have to almost deal with anything because if people are doing what they need to do and applying what we all know as leadership, then most of the problems go away. And this was a very good example of how an agency can apply this in helping each supervisor and manager to follow through and do their job and deal with the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions don't solve any problem. It is an act of leadership that will resolve the issue. And that's what makes this agency effective, and also any agency that applies this. The last example of the power of the group that I want to use is the other two that we discuss had to do with agencies or units. I want to mention why leadership training fails because it's not training. 95% of the leadership courses in this country basically are a TEL educational based program where everybody sits and talks, are normally an instructor talks and says, here's how you effectively communicate, here's how you deal with a problem employee, et cetera, et cetera. The trouble is there is no test of can you apply it. And I had a friend that ran a leadership training program. And I want all of you to pay attention to this. This is what made this course not a educational based course, but a training course where there was TEL, an education format, and then there was a follow through where the people did it. And in this program, obviously various topics are talked about, and it was 3 1-week courses spread over several months. So you're here for a week, and then a month or so later, you're here for module 2, and a month or two later, you're here for module 3. And what they did was very interesting. at the end of every module, every person, every person in the class had to share how they were going to apply the particular principles of that week when they are in between the two modules. So, in other words, here's what we learned this week, and how I, as an individual, I'm going to actually attempt to apply this back in the agency culture. And so everybody had to go around the room. And then guess what's going to happen on the Monday morning of the next module? The first thing everybody did was have to go around the room and share how they did what they promised to do at the end of the previous module. And again, a positive peer pressure of knowing you have to face everybody in the class. Guess what you did? You did it, and you were being forced in a benevolent way to practice what you just heard, which very few leadership courses have that concept in their curriculum. So again, it is talking about what's going on in the class, but then you've got to practice it for the next month and come back and say how you did it. And it was very interesting that the guy who coordinated the course, who was an early mentor of mine, said it was the most effective training program he had ever been involved in that actually changed people and transformed them into better supervisors and managers. Why? Because they're being forced to practice it. And we've all sat in courses, we enjoy the material, but 3 weeks later, we can't remember hardly anything about it. And no offense, but we didn't practice what we heard. We had good intentions, but they were never followed through on. And as a result of that, um, people changed. And it was a transformational experience, not an educational experience. And after teaching in university for 12 years, I saw that my best students, if you ask them a month after the course was over, what were the three major things you learned? You'd look at them, be confused, and they were trying to pull up something, and they got an A in the course, but it did not change them and give them the skills to apply. And this is what we ought to do in all of our leadership training programs. Y'all listen, a multiple choice test on the three types of communication at the end of the week only test your short term memorization for the purpose of answering the test, not the ability to practice this back in the agency. And that's why I think this is probably the finest example of how we can use our leadership training, which is really education, and turn it into a training format where we help each other in, again, a benevolent accountability to apply it and learn by doing it and having the encouragement of others, not just when we get together for the second module of training, but during the week. And it was interesting, he said that people would call each other, and these were from different agencies. They would call each other and say, hey, how's it going? Did you get to deal with the problem employee? Did you get to ask that person for forgiveness? Were you able to confront the lieutenant about what he had done? Because I've been thinking about you, because I know that's got to be tough. Think about that. And the other thing thinking about is you're building a relationship of trust among the participants in the class. And at the end of the day, that is very valuable. And if you really think about these, after the course is over, you've already established this relationship. And I think that there's a strong chance that people are going to reach out to you, how you doing, what's going on in your life, through a text or an email or a phone call. And at the end of the day, this gives us other brothers and sisters who are managers and supervisors to help us hold each other accountable to do what we need to do. Leadership is not some philosophy, it is what you do. And a small act is better than 20 great intentions. And this is what accountability brings to the table. And if you have people in your life who help you follow through because they want you to succeed and you want them to succeed, everything changes. That's why your predecessors failed. They tried this alone and they failed because they were afraid. But when you have the courage and encouragement of everybody around you, keeping you in the fight, so to speak, as a manager or supervisor, you will do what you need to do and you will become an effective leader, not because you're awesome, but because the men and women around you are making you follow through. Thanks for joining us on the They to We Leadership podcast. If today's episode helped you think differently about management, take a moment to reflect and then apply it. Because real leadership isn't what you say, it's what you do next. And the real enemy is our pride and blindness on how we are really doing. Only with the help of others can we truly make an impact on those around us.